Hi, a big welcome from Poetry on the Move Festival in Canberra, Australia. And we're just so excited, especially because we find ourselves back in lockdown very unexpectedly after many months of not having lockdown. And because we're spending more time indoors, I think it's wonderful. We have this recording, we have poetry to turn to, and most especially, we have the theme of grace and a given grace. So I'm very excited to be working for the second time in collaboration with Squircle Line Press. So welcome everybody, and thank you so much for being here literally across the world.
Thank you so much, Kimberly. Thank you. And thank you everyone for being with us on this first overseas launch for our anthology, A Given Grace. And Eric will tell you a bit about the huge celebration for Catholicism in two countries, Philippines, where he's from, and Singapore, where I'm from. Right, Eric?
Yes, so it's a very big year for these two countries in Southeast Asia. It's the quincentennial of the Christianization of the Philippines. On Easter Day of 500 years ago, there was this first mass in Cebu, in the central part of the Philippines, and that was the start of the evangelization in my country. And the spread of religion was quite fast over there, and it has left a very deep imprint on the people and the culture. So that even if we're not celebrating it, because of the colonial underpinnings of that occasion, the church is still celebrating the quincentennial. And here in Singapore, it's the bicentennial of the start of the church here. There were a couple of French missionaries who were sent here from Vietnam, and they found about 12 Catholics in the area, and they celebrated the first mass at what is now the place of the Raffles Hotel. It was kind of rough in the beginning. There was some persecution, and at a certain point, there was some massacre of Chinese Catholics by some triad members. So the triads were here also 200 years ago. Some of these Catholics were killed for their faith. They did not, because they didn't want to join the triads then. But it's a big spiritual celebration all over, and Desmond and I are celebrating it in a special way with this anthology of Given Grace. And we've invited poets from both the Philippines and Singapore, as well as from all over the world. And we are so grateful to have some of them with us tonight.
Yes. And in putting together the anthology, it's been very exciting. First we had the first call where we invited Singaporeans and Filipinos, and we had over 60 writers. And then after that, we realized it was so huge, we wanted to welcome people from abroad. And so we cast the net much wider. And now we've got over 80 writers who are within the anthology. It's very exciting. We've been very inclusive. We've had, first-time writers who are probably going to get their work published in this anthology as their debut work. And then we've got you very distinguished authors who are award-winning with a whole string of books. So we just feel so honored to be able to bring these voices together for this anthology. All right. So without further ado, I get to introduce our very distinguished first reader for today. She's Diane Glancy, and Diane is known as one of the greatest modern Native American writers. In 2010, Salt Publishing published The Salt Companion to Diane Glancy. She's a professor emerita at Macalester College. Currently, she teaches at Carlow University and Pittsburgh Theological Seminary. Her current books include Island of the Innocent, a consideration of the Book of Job, and A Line of Driftwood, the Ada Blackjack story, both coming from Turtle Point Press. Forthcoming next year is another title, Home is the Road, Wandering the Land, Shaping the Spirit. Diane is amazingly prolific. She's authored over 30 poetry collections, over 25 prose works, including novels, some 10 plays, nonfiction as well. And she's got a whole list of awards to her name and several, lifetime achievement awards to recognize her huge contribution to the literary arts. So everyone, please welcome the lovely Diane. Diane, so honored.
Thank you, Desmond, and thank you also, Eric. I enjoyed your words very much. I've been a Christian, I think, forever, and I've also been in academia, where instead of being persecuted, your faith is often ignored. So we've had many different experiences. I'm also in rural Texas at the moment. I visit my son and his family, and sometimes the connection is not always clear. So I hope it goes well this morning. And because I got up 1 hour early, I was looking at my book, Island of the Innocent. And if it's all right, Desmond, I want to read from it because I was preparing for my class at the theological seminary. One of my favorite books in the Bible has always been Job. He went through such an enormous trial and came out with more than he had in the beginning. And so in Island of the Innocent, I can hold that up. I examine his book and I also interweave it with some sufferings of the Native American and also my own Jobian experiences. I just took the freedom of the Bible that goes between poetry and prophecy and history and documentation and biography and used that as permission to mix all these different experiences together. May lit the sky. Job's canoes unfastened, hay rolls unrolled, Sabaeans, 3 bands of Chaldeans, fire and whirlwind. Take 7 sons and 3 daughters, the flocks and herds, 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 asses, 500 yoke of oxen. 3 friends and a 4th come from their own places to talk about the reasons for suffering, blaming Job of wrongdoing, but as it turns out, is a trial from our God, the lovely one, who taught Satan, have you considered my servant Job? Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord. This is interesting enough. Alternative facts. The friends sat 7 days with Job, the former owner of sheep and camels, now desolate also of children. Bildad reviewed his notes with friends, chomping at the dialogue. They preferred monologue. If we can speak to you, how could we hold back? Job 4:2. There was a lot of talking then. You have strengthened many. Now you fold when you're in trouble. You can't be innocent, Job. Zophar and Eliphaz agree. Their different thoughts blaming Job in what could be called an unfair debate. 4 against 1. I also give Job's wife a chance to speak. Women are so often silenced in Scripture. She was first to speak. Job talks with his friends. Would they ask me to join them? I stand silent as a wind turbine on the high plains. Where are my words that lift the flat sheet of the world to address the suffering and dilemmas? They leave me out, to be without words. The stubbles hurt my feet. The universe ate our first children. We all are expendable. This mystery, this unanswerable, this old one up there who spoke the world into being, but I remain silent. What skies are these? To whom do they belong? Tell me where you are, what you see. What God is there with Satan rolling around his throne saying, give me Job for a moment. Are there other worlds? Isn't this one enough? All those buzzings of comets and falling stars in the observatory of Uz, those astro heads, those Job's friends, I would join the argument if I had their bag of words. I wrote a poem to go with the cover, and I'm going to try. That's not going to work. Anyway, in 1976, 40 years or so ago, I bought the illustrations of Blake, of William Blake. You can see Job laying there. And every time I would move, I would see that book as I packed it in a box. And so all these years, Job was resonating in my memory. So I wrote an ekphrastic poem, which is a poem written from a drawing, and it's called With Dreams Upon My Bed. He's on a bedroll like any cowboy on the range, but here he's placed by a lake of fire. God and the serpent hover over him. It is God the accuser who points to the tablets above the zigzag lightning crawling through the sky. Near Job's bedroll, the waves are tongues of flames from which two demons reach up and hold on to Job as if to pull him below. The third demon simply lifts his chains to show him. God has a cloven foot as the cattle, or worse, as if he's part devil himself. Maybe it's not God, but Satan transformed into an angel of light. No, that can't be right. The shining one is God, under whom Job lies flat on his bedroll with the end curled up for a pillow. Job is sandwiched between God and flames. Job is seeing what Job is made of. But this serpent who exalts himself above all that is called God or is worshiped, rests his head on God's arm. But it's God's arm that separates Job and the serpent. Not all is lost, but still, what terror, what blaze of terrible thought. God wearing a serpent as if a foxtail stole. God letting Satan tempt Job, taking all but his life. What a mixed message to sort out. What effort to understand the purpose of hoof and snake, stone tablet and lightning. How can anyone get near the sheltering, dangerous God and trust in his benevolence? What odd message in this illustration in black and white. Yet Job holds the hoof pick of his words. Though worms destroy this body, yet in my flesh I shall see God, if ever a cattle drover had a song. And I'm going to finish with a poem called He Liveth. And I want to hold up one more time this very beautiful illustration, if you can see the bedroll and rolled up on the end. He's such a master, William Blake, 1825, when he drew the story. All right, he liveth. Were it a whale, the sea had bounds, but not suffering. Job lost all. His friends went bazooka with accusation. If Job did not understand at first, then who, I ask, could understand God? Who would bring Satan to turn, in turn, who would say, give Job to me, and see the stuffing in the overstuffed benefactor, who fed orphans and widows and was benevolent to the 9th degree in chapter 29. The self-sung Job and all he did and was in Uz. It was there at midnight I found the exit to Walmart off Interstate 35 in Wichita, where I waited out the storm in my car until light. I know my Redeemer liveth, and he shall stand at the latter day upon the earth. Job 19:25. And thus it was in the deepest bite of rain that sadness was a perpendicular line upright to heaven. Because of Job's sorrow and restoration, I could handle the benefits of God, working on things until I came forth through loss with more than in the beginning. Thank you.
Thank you so much,
Wonderful.
Diane. Thank you for sharing those poems. Diane, I read up some interviews on you, how exciting. And you had this long interview with Image Journal where you talk about, growing up and you've got a Cherokee, right? You knew that from your dad.
Yes.
So can you tell us about what it's like to, to have to live with all these different lived experiences and identities, intersectionality, right? And how that informs your writing, spiritual writing?
There was always a thread of continuity through all the disparate parts, through all the fragments. There was always this wonderful through line. My grandmother was a quilt maker, and she would cut up fabrics, different fabrics, and sew the different pieces together in very intricate patterns. And I think I used that idea as I watched her sew to put these different fragments together in some sort of patterned quilt, more or less. My father worked for the stockyards, and every night he would bring home meat that my mother would cook for dinner. And he would always unwrap the package. It was always white, shiny paper, like my Sunday patent leather shoes. And there would always be a little blood there in the package with the meat. That something had to die that we might live was the lesson. And when I was in church, it was the blood of Christ that he shed for us that we might live on a much higher plane, in fact, eternal. And so there again, that through line of my father's native heritage, partial native heritage, my mother's German English, nothing ever really fit very well. And yet, at the same time, there was this overall paradigm that all things, all differences fit together. I mean, look at us here on the screen, all of our differences all over the world. And I mean, even Christianity has so many different interpretations, all the denominations and the sub-denominations. I live both in Kansas and Texas, where I have family, grandchildren. And in Kansas, I go to a large Methodist church, and its emphasis is on social justice and helping others. And in Texas, I go to a small fundamental church where one's standing in Christ is upmost. So I love all these differences, these incongruities. I mean, my whole life has been built on that. And yet there was the sameness of the same spirit, Christ, I suppose, in all, that made it operatable, that I could function in all this difference because of the Lord that I believed in.
Lovely. Thank you. And you've written all these poetry collections. Have you felt your voice morph or change or evolve in a certain way? And how do you feel about that? Do you struggle with it, or do you celebrate it? Where are you at as a poet?
It depends on what day it is, Desmond. Sometimes I celebrate, sometimes I mourn if things are not going well, And how do you crunch all these different things into a book on the consideration of Job? And can I get away with this? Yes, because the Bible is full of differences. It's full of different voices, and yet it operates in such a wonderful way. So I think my experimental work has just gotten more experimental.
Oh,
so,
nice.
And I'm
Yep. And just one last question. Who are your favorite poets out there, or what are you reading now?
I don't know. I read so many different things in so many different journals. Yeah. Diaz Martin is here. He has a whole line of poetry books from Whip and Stock. Yeah. It's just, I think it's whoever I'm reading at the moment is my favorite one.
All right. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you. I know it's so early in the morning over there, and we've taken up so much of your time. Thank you so much, Diane, for sharing your poems and your thoughts with us. All right. Now we are very happy to introduce dear Tina Kelly And let me just introduce Tina. Tina Kelly's Rise Wildly appeared in 2020 from Cavan Carey Press, joining A Bloom and a Rye, Precise and the Gospel of Galore, a Washington State Book Award winner. She co-authored Breaking Barriers, From P-Tech Schools Create a Pathway from High School to College to Career. And another title, Almost Home, Helping Kids Move from Homelessness to Hope. Now, Tina reported for the New York Times for a decade, and there she actually shared a staff Pulitzer Prize for her 9/11 coverage. She and her husband have 2 children. So, Tina, it's all yours. You need to unmute, Tina, please.
Thank you. I thought, here I am. It is early. I'm so grateful to be part of this and to be part of Given Grace. It's fixing to be a wonderful collection, just given what I've heard so far this morning. I'm going to read my poems from the collection. The first one is called Arguments Against Atelophobia, which is the fear of imperfection. It has an epigraph from my favorite theologian in the world, John Shelby Spong, and his book, This Hebrew Lord. And the epigraph reads, if you can be aware of the self you are, you can also dream of the self you want to be. The dream always judges the reality. The gulf between the two is the source of our human discontent. So this is basically a paean to perfectionism, arguments against atelophobia, the fear of imperfection. Why fret, my pets? The faultless barely exists, strangles the good, gives you gas. Your charm resides in your face blindness, your forgetting to get a blue shot, your firm belief that white wall-to-wall carpet won't break your heart. Calm down, my loves. You finish 80% of anything, half of that with a committee, a third of that if the government's involved. You send holiday cards in March, but see, your friends still know you care. Readers never know if you blew the deadline. Nearly half your thoughts are daydreams. You worry about getting there by 6, but nothing starts on time. On average, you make 218 mistakes in the workplace each year. That bone-crushing reply all that says, feel free to ball me personally when you meant call. That's 15,478 mistakes in a lifetime. But, and here's what I love about you, you laugh 500,000 times in your life, 31 times for each mistake. People are the greatest remaining cause of failure by far, said the guy on the internet who counted the human errors, adding, we are flesh and bone animals who tire, whose minds wander and lose concentration. But I bet he meant wander, and I love him more for it. And yes, you could ask, why create us so imperfect, Holy Lord? To which I answer, all I wanted to do is love you. It is easier this way. The next one is called What You Missed in Sunday School the Week Before Confirmation. Mrs. Barney gave us one peek into the future. One of us could die, driven by our drunk sweetheart, smack into a tree. Then she showed a video on how sometimes what we hear in the saddest sleigh bells of spring peepers sounds truer than testaments. Next was a group discussion exploring the teenager Jesus and how good it feels throwing tables around your father's house. Later, she gave us a handout with mnemonic devices. We learned to remember our city's street names, south to north, by Jesus Christ made Seattle under pressure. That proved quite useful. She also suggested that writing memos to God can feel more frank than prayer, as in subject, push me higher. Over Dixie cups of Hawaiian punch, she told us of funeral mutes who stood near the church door. Their job was to say nothing, look sad, wear top hats with ribbons trailing, and mouth silent empathy lessons to the youth of America. Show up, bring a casserole. Sometimes nothing we say will help, so stand still. This one is called To God. The publisher advised, beware of such phrases as recently, last spring, and next year. They will quickly become inaccurate. I forgive myself the nap. Thank you for this knowledge. The moon is moving away from the earth at the rate of 1.5 inches a year. There is a space in space, exactly my height, that a planet used to roar through, noisily, violently. Thank you for the drawstring light of sunset. Thank you for the tripartite folded double iris center, and for phosphenes, the glitter I see when I rub my eyes. Also for the wave-edged trace dance of sandpiper. May I remind you to keep being ever. Distant one Sunday morning when hearts left with shoes, closer now, and then I forgive you the nap. And the last one is called Letters to Mary for sale on eBay, based on a true story. The bag still floated, weighted down with dreams, with nightmares. Make him love me, make her quit crack, forgive me, heal them. Did hope keep them afloat? It bobbed in the surf. A seal's head? No, a plastic bag, magenta flowers, paper bags inside. In those, letters unopened, washed up on Atlantic City sand, miles south of the gilded altar they were left on. Can I win the lottery twice? Can the witch who called the IRS on me calm down? Can you forgive me for aborting my child? Can the judge see I am innocent? This is just a hint of what really happens, the private stains of 100 strangers, the blots on tenement ceilings as trains rush past. Tired gas station guy, home health aide, hardware store clerk, waitress who didn't quite care, sleep well. May mercy, tears, salt water, and a fisherman attend you with the care that greatly sent your sharpest wishes to see. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tina. Tina, you shared with us for the last poem, Letters to Mary, it's based on a true story. And, you've been a journalist. So what is it? Eric and I were journalists too. So
Great.
So what is it like? We always love to hear people who work in different genres. What is it like to move between spaces from, say, the nonfiction of Judd and poetry? Especially here, you're actually narrating something of a true account, right? So why did you choose the lyric for that?
It's what I do. I don't know. It's, I think if I weren't a journalist, I would find it very hard to be a poet. I'm still a journalist. I write books instead of newspaper articles, but so much of my inspiration comes from journalism, and also lately comes from reading the internet. And I find a lot of weird stuff out there. It's a weird place full of all sorts of time to waste also, but glittering facts that I put in a file and set aside until I'm ready to sit down and write. And then that's how I write. I open up my file of things that I'm going to put in a poem someday. and I see what sticks together on a given day. And a lot of times it's cut and pasted from online. When I was a general assignment reporter, I got so much joy out of talking to strangers and people that I would never have had a chance to meet otherwise. So I would steal from them shamelessly. And a lot of my poems are made up of quotes that I've heard or inspired by quotes that I've heard in my reading and reporting.
Nice. Thank you. Yeah, that's intertextuality. Julia Kristeva talks about how the world is just a reservoir of language, and we're tapping into all these consciousnesses and a language out there. What about your own spiritual journey? Can you share with us some highs and lows, if you're willing to?
Sure. I am what they call a cradle Episcopalian, so an Episcopalian from birth. It was something that I shared very much with my mother.
Yeah.
She and I would go. My dad was not a churchgoer, and my faith was very, I don't know if my faith was tested. No, let me reword that. I was tested during my mother's long decline. And some of the bright spots of those years were when our priest would come and give her communion, and she was unable to speak. She had Parkinson's, or I don't know, they never quite figured it out. It was Parkinson's or something similar. And it was just watching her lose capacity every day for about a year or two. It was 2 years she couldn't speak. So I could never find out if she was in pain. I was relying on thumbs ups and thumbs downs and that sort of thing. But when the priest came to give her communion, a tear came out of her eye, and she wasn't a crier. And we were sitting outside in the fall leaves in the little courtyard. And it was just this moment of grace that was quite formidable. And then she and I had always gone to church together on Christmas Eve, and they would always dim the lights at the end and play Silent Night. And we would always cry. And my husband would say, "Oh, so did you go to church with your mom and cry at Silent Night again?" And I said, "Yes, I did," and in a kind way. And when she passed away, it was actually on Christmas Eve. And people said, "Oh, that's so sad. What a terrible thing to die by Christmas." But my father had already set the precedent by dying in early December. So the season was already kind of sad anyway. And I think my mother, who was so considerate of my feelings and so often wanted me to be in a cheerful way, probably if she had anything to do with it, she might have chosen to go on that night that we were always most close. So when she passed, I had a house full of out of town family to buoy me up. And it was almost a message that it was okay.
Wow. Thank you for sharing. Oh, and oh yeah, and oh no. Okay, your Christmases, right? Are just gonna be
Well,
how do you feel about Christmas? No.
it's gotten better. It's
Okay.
okay. I mean, she had lived a very long life, and there was a relief when she wasn't suffering any longer. And my dad passed in 2007, so I got used to Christmases being different since then. And then my mom passed in 2016, and I had them for a good long time, and I'm okay.
Yeah. No, thank you so much. It's such an important story for everyone out there to be listening to. How do you feel spirituality can help people in these very difficult times, COVID and lots of death around us and illness? And what's your go-to, spiritually? And maybe people could learn from each other, right?
I wrote a piece for the Diocese of Newark, and maybe I can put it in the chat, on mask making. So I live in a small town outside of New York City, and on March 21st, 2020, right as the pandemic was getting particularly dire, we live in Essex County, which is, I think, had the highest death rate of per capita for COVID of any state at some point. And I know New Jersey's had the highest death rate per capita now. Some neighbors on Facebook said, let's sew some masks. And we started a Facebook group called SOMA, Sewing Volunteers, for South Orange, Maplewood, which are the two towns that are sort of sister towns. Mm-hmm. And I became part of that, and my front porch became the depot where people dropped off fabric and elastic, and other people would come and cut it and put it in kits, and people would come and sew the kits and put the masks back on the front porch, and they'd be delivered to hospitals. So we did 47,000 homemade masks, and that gave me faith in humanity that had been completely taken away by the headlines, and that's kept me going, and it's still going. We're still sewing for our schools as our schools open up. We just did 120 so that each of our elementary schools could have 20 masks. So that's that kindness made me happy cry. Like, I would open my front door and see like bolts of fabric, and I thought, okay, the ingenuity of people who figured out this process on how to quarantine everything for 4 days in the garage and then bring it back, and it was a marvel, and that has helped.
Thank you. It's called the Sewing Volunteers Project. Is that it? I think that's the one I read about.
SOMA Sewing Volunteers. Yeah, that's the Facebook group. And
nice.
SOMA's South Orange, Maplewood.
Wow, thank you for doing all that good work. That's great. And you love gardening too, I read somewhere, isn't
yes.
it?
That helps too. Actually, we were dropping off plants for each other in the middle of the pandemic, and I was able to make friends in the pandemic among all the isolation, and there was definitely some of God working in all of that.
Okay, wow. Thank you so much. All right, so we're gonna thank you for gracing us with your presence. Yeah, everyone here is so warm and generous and kind. Thank you. I love this. I love this reading. All right, I get to introduce a good friend, Don Diaz Martin, and then Eric will introduce the rest of the readers for today. Diaz Martin is the author of 5 poetry collections, including Ampersand, that came out in 2018, and his newly released book, Angelicus, 2021, both from Cascade Books. He is poet in residence at McMaster Divinity College. He is also the series editor for the Poema poetry series, where he's edited more than a whopping 30 poetry collections and 3 anthologies. He and his wife live in Brampton, Ontario, and they have 2 adult sons. Don, it's all yours.
It's great to be with you this morning, or I should say this evening, for those of you in Australia and Asia. Great to see you again, Desmond. It's also great to see so many other faces I recognize and a few others I don't. My very first connection with Singapore was through Aaron. And if you could magically look over my shoulder in the right angle, you'd see one of Aaron's books on my shelf behind me. I feel very blessed to be connected with so many people around the world. Diane and Julie and Marjorie are among the people who have published books within my series. One of the most recent books in this series is by amazing Australian poet, Andrew Lansdowne, who's new and selected. So I feel really honored to have been able to work with Andrew. Just very excited to be connected with you. I also delight in the fact that we're of different faith backgrounds. I mean, Christian backgrounds, we're dedicated to the Lord, but of different backgrounds. Yesterday was the birthday of my 92-year-old aunt, who spent her whole career, her whole life as a missionary in Ifugao in the Philippines, a Protestant missionary up there. So a week ago, I was driving her back to the city where she lives from when she was visiting here. It's just so, we're interconnected. And even though we have different labels and different interpretations, I love the fact that we're able to focus on our commonality, our love for Jesus, our submission to him, our desire to honor God, our seeking after beauty and goodness and truth in the name of the Lord. I mean, I just love that. And Diane was so prolific with some of the things she said earlier. So I just want to say hello to everybody, and so pleased to be able to be part of this. I'm going to share two poems with you. They both have prayer in the title, so you might think I'm obsessed with prayer, and maybe I am, I'm not sure. But this first one is one that's in the new anthology. It's called Midrash on the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, simultaneously far and near, my insufficient fear could never drive me to dive deep as Titanic on the wide Atlantic's floor, for there's nowhere to hide. Or if I tried an astro Jonah, scooting to some far star, that's where you'd be. Especially for me, since you've made a walking temple of this aging cage of bones that could never contain you. And though your notorious silence shakes the last leaf from my tree, I can't push you from my consciousness, stress only what I see. For this shriveling balloon of a world would be so hollow in your absence, and my only escape from blame would seep away. Hallowed be your name. We pray for what is and what will be, your divinity spreading kingdom seed into its valuable dying, so that what is grows. And so reality subtracts our macro negativity from our micro good. And so our mess doesn't mess with your sovereignty, as if it ever could. Give us this day bread with strawberry jam, even if made by our own hands. For though I worked for coins to buy flour, and I worked the dough before it went into the pan, and I helped hull berries for the slow rolling hosanna, without sun and rain shower, there'd be no grain or berries ripening in rows. We shall not live by bread alone, but by every sweet jewel of Christ. I know my mind forges manacles, and the keys my heart jingles are slow to click in those rusty locks, so the miry sorrow of those who've wronged me will be a swamp they must wallow in. May we release ourselves as you have already released us, for it's not until the last chain falls away that we go free. Lead us not into sensation, but deliver us from revealing what we think proves us right. Uncover our hiding, rip sunglasses from our faces, our defense against sunlight on into the night. Spit on our eyes or pluck them right out to be made new and without offense. Amen. I will also read one poem from my new book, Angelicus. It's a collection of poetry where every poem is written from the point of view of an angel. And I had a lot of fun with this one. And as I mentioned, this one has prayer in the title. This one's called An Angel Explains Prayer. You make the simple so complicated, little one. But then to explain, I may need to make it more complicated still. It involves the Master's triunity, how number 3 translates, and number 2 advocates, though number 1 knows what's going on before one word is said. It's like when you whisper, "Dear God, I carry your intentions to the skies," although it's not me carrying them at all. 1 million angels circle the Master besides the 6-winged seraphim who are always singing praise. Each has a prayer burden to share. But when I arrive, it's like a tornado that can't touch me. All's a blur in the whirl of wings and wonder. There's a hum of voices and trumpets, and then his eyes lock on mine. And nothing else is there but your prayer and his compassionate stare. Simply put, you speak, and without interrupting a single raindrop in mid-fall, the universe and everything beyond the universe more than stops, has stopped, ceases in anticipation of ceasing. And the magnitude of magnitude, The magnificence of magnificence bends, enthralled with your turning in his direction, with the very sigh of your being drawn heavenward. Prayer too, little one, is when he reaches out to you. But by that point, you've usually lost focus, distracted by his apparent silence, your prayer's eloquence, or perhaps the fine design of your shoes.
Thank you so much, Don. Don, okay, I know you're a big time editor. Anyone who Googles Christian poetry is gonna get you. You know, you edit that huge series. You have this wonderful web journal out of the university, Poems for Ephesians. Tell us, what are the challenges of, first of all, why? Why did you dedicate your whole life to editing, writing Christian poetry? And what are the challenges and complexities of doing that sort of work, writing and editing?
Well, first of all, Desmond, I'm nothing special. I'm just a guy who loves poetry and loves the Lord. Mm-hmm. And in my striving to improve my art, I just found that I was coming alongside other people. Other people were coming alongside me and encouraging me and helping me. And I just found that that was the role that I was to take, to come alongside other people. I've been given opportunities that I just look to God and say thank you. Editing for Whitf and Stock with the Poema Poetry series was something that I hadn't actually sought out. It was something that was kind of proposed to me, and I said, that'd be great. I'd love to do that, thinking full well, that's not going to happen. But what a nice thing. And God has blessed me. Kingdom Poets is a blog I started doing in 2010, thinking I'd do it for about a year. And I just, this morning was posted, it posts every Monday. This morning, I put up a post about Adelia Pratto, who's a wonderful Brazilian poet. There's just so much beautiful work out there. And I love drawing together the poets of different time periods, the poets of different denominations, the poets who have important things to say about our relationship with God. And I do think that poetry is a vehicle that, shall I say, God sanctioned it. When you look at the Bible, I mean, how much of the Bible is poetry and story? God has chosen to communicate to us and with us that way, as opposed to giving us a systematic theology or something like that. So I believe that he wants us to interact with him. He doesn't want us to just use our brains in a very abstract sort of way that we just take information and give back information like we're processing like a computer. But he's given us creativity and beauty and goodness, and he just loves us as his children. And to me, poetry works well with that. I mean, that's who I am. That's who I was made to be. And you see all these other wonderful poets that you're interviewing today and hearing their work. I mean, it's just a blessing to be able to work together.
Yeah, it is. And Don, tell us a bit about your whole journey, you know, highlights, anecdotes about your own spiritual journey as a Christian.
Sure. I was raised in what I now see is quite a fundamentalist church, evangelical, and wonderful people. I would say that through the years, I've gradually moved a little bit away from fundamentalism, but still quite within the evangelical community. But again, I just find I've always been somebody who questions, who asks questions, who doesn't accept things that people say it just because somebody said it. So I've always been a questioning person, but the Lord has been good to me. And I think, you know, I think I mentioned this to you, Desmond, in the interview we did for the Singapore Poetry Festival. I was blessed to be in a community where people just loved me. I mean, I was this crazy kid. They probably, you know, I had ADHD running all over the place, and they just loved me, even though I was not easy to deal with. And as I grew in my faith, I just found that, you know, for example, the arts was not something big within that community, but just even to be who I am, people have accepted me for who I am. not that I'm anything special, but because they just, and not to say that these people were perfect. I mean, I can look back and see all kinds of flaws, but flaws in people who love you are quite more easy to accept, right? So I just felt blessed, and I felt at home within the church. And at first the church I grew up in, but then that broadened out to the wider Christian community as well, just to be accepted and to be loved, even with all my multitudinous flaws. It's just, it's been a joy.
Thank you so much, Don. All right.
Could I ask a question or two?
Sure.
Right, so Don, what do you think is the place of Christian poetry in a world of Insta poetry? And there are plenty of them. They're quite successful in the publishing world lately. Should Christian poets go in step with this movement or fad?
I've never been one to worry about what the fads or directions in poetry are. Most of my poetry is free verse, but I do a lot of work that has a lot of rhyme and rhythm and alliteration and things in it. I think we should kind of look at the big picture of what poetry is, and to find your own voice within that. I wouldn't chase any fad. I would just seek to write the poetry you feel called to, write poetry that's true to you. I mean, I love lots of poetry of different types, and I try not, well, I let it influence me, but I don't try to imitate, because I find there's just so much beautiful stuff. Complex poets such as Margaret Avison, or very simple poets like Mary Oliver, who do beautiful work in quite diverse ways. And I would say, just write the poetry you feel drawn to. Never mind what the fads are. Fads come and go, but good solid poetry is lasts. I don't.
All right, and my other question has to do with your latest book. What was the motivation behind it? Because is it partly because there seems to be a lot of interest in the dark arts these days? They're all over pop culture.
I would say that had nothing to do with it.
Okay.
I just found, one thing we do as poets do is we try to make familiar things, make things that are unfamiliar familiar. But we also try to take things that are familiar and make them strange so that people can look at them in new ways. And I found that writing from the point of view of angels, I was able to do that because I could come at things from a different angle. I was also able to bring in very naturally the spiritual in an unforced sort of way. So I could have angels talk about ordinary things in our lives, and but they always have just that little bit of, even when they're looking at our very human lives, they have that spiritual perspective. So therefore that just sort of subtly creeps in. So I just found it was a wonderful vehicle. Once I had written one, suddenly there were so many possibilities that I knew it had to be an entire book.
Yes, I was so blessed by that decision of yours. Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to introduce our host at Poetry on the Move. So Kimberly is the author of 2 books of poetry, Sometimes a Woman, published by Recent Work Press, and Finally the Moon, published by Stephen S. Austin University Press. She has an MFA in creative writing from the University of Texas at El Paso. Kimberly was shortlisted for the University of Canberra's Vice Chancellor's Poetry Prize in 2019 and serves as the director of the University of Canberra's Poetry on the Move Festival. And she's originally from Detroit, Michigan. And she has some very interesting poems for us tonight. Kimberly?
Thanks, Eric.
The stage is yours. Yeah.
Thank you. So I'll start. I'm just going to read the poems that are in the anthology. And I'll start with the poem that was shortlisted for the UC Vice Chancellor's Prize. It's a short one. It's called The Swallows Are Chasing. And the swallows are chasing God, skimming green pools, edging the cliffs, building their nests in the O of his name. The swallows are chasing God, and I am chasing the swallows as far as my flat feet and wingless back will carry me, around the fat cottonwood, over the gravel, across the bridge to El Rio, past the bare spotted deer sign, almost to the tip of the massive ruby sky. This next one is called Grace, and it's from my first book, and I think the title suits the anthology pretty well. So this is Grace. The child works on printing the fat black crayon, marking paper the color of the sun. Uppercase letters align like soldiers. G, 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 J, 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 J. But lowercase letters misbehave, reverse and drift. D, 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 B, D, D, B, P, P, Q, P, Q. She gets the first letter of her name right every time. Hey, hey, hey. But the last letter is tricky. Which way to extend the leg on the Y? And she wonders if F is supposed to blow west or east. Each letter forces finger cramps, for mother patiently insists, again, again, already teaching the child the mystery of birth, the great unease which leads to unwavering devotion. Late one night, she accelerates through the dark, rounding the curves of San Juan Boulevard, reminding her of the crayon tracing loops and filling empty paper. She sees words carved from darkness. All that time at the antique desk, scraping shapes into letters, learning reverence, letters to words, words to love. This is an ekphrastic poem. This is St. Anthony of Padua, 1750. It's a sculpture of St. Anthony that sits in the Phoenix Art Museum, where I lived. I lived in Phoenix last before moving here. So this is St. Anthony of Padua, 1750, Spanish, unknown sculpture. St. Anthony, patron saint of lost things, why are your hands empty? You stare at the air around them in wooden-eyed surprise. Your face is still young, part tree, part polychrome glaze. Your 5 o'clock check frames red lips. But your hands, St. Anthony, your hands, only 2 thumbs and 2 fingers intact, pointing upward, fingernails the size of a baby's. St. Anthony, you are everywhere for me, at home on my altar, in Kiev, underground, on a card slipped into my wallet, or helping me find my eyeglasses in the grass in the side yard. You rest in the museum, inside the plastic case at the end of the hall, your hands aloft, waiting to see who arrives. And this is the last one. This is what I carry. How to bring a young boy into this shadowy world when he is full of such light. I offer options. You could pray to St. Michael. You could pray to St. Andrew, your patron saint, or you could pray to St. Anthony. He's for kids. But my go-to saint is St. Francis. Make me a channel of your peace. But this boy doesn't accept the options, claiming he doesn't know how to pray. Can't even start. And I can't explain what I know. We only have what we carry. In the 1970s, St. Bridget's ceiling exposed bluebirds and a naked Adam hovering in a loincloth. I inspected the baby angels' penises weekly. The ceiling was wide as the sea, and I floated on it buoyed by Russell Robinson's bass voice, which commanded us to sing it over. 7-year-old body rattling my ribs, vibrating my arms when we raised them during the last part of the Our Father, and the adults beside me would pull me almost off the floor. For thy is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever, we sang. Amen. Mr. Robinson's voice has resided inside me ever since. The deep resounding I have never heard again, not in 40 years, reminding me of the lilt and the lift of grace and how to manage what I carry.
It's wonderful, Kimberly. Thank you very much. And I just observed that children are a motif in your works. Is that are they a metaphor for your spiritual childhood or for something else?
I didn't think about that. Well, the boy in the last one was my son. You know, it's that real. I don't know if it's a struggle for other parents, but it's, you know, how do you impart your beliefs, right, without imposing, or, you know, it's just tricky, and that's really, I think, what that's about. And then the child in the other poem, the Grace poem, is me, right? I'm dyslexic, and I was so fortunate to have a mother in the 1970s who knew what dyslexia was, and I would have to trace letters over, and it was such a chore and so tedious. And I swear that's how I fell in love with language, with words, you know? So I don't think, I mean, I am the first person, Eric, to seek out metaphor. And yet in this case, I think we're pretty literal.
It's all right. But it works pretty well. And that must be a wonderful experience to be touched by grace, like to be dyslexic and to turn out to be a poet.
You know, it's my mother, of course, marvels at it all the time, and that
Right.
moms have, right, of making big deals out of things. But I do think it brought me to language in a different way than a lot of people, and that uniqueness. It's, you know, it's, for me, it's this commitment that I can't even express. It's a gesture that's continuous, and I feel like that's maybe one way to define grace as well.
Yes, and then also there's this strong element of art, like the other arts besides literature in your work. You read that poem about Saint Anthony of Padua, that statue. Could that be one way by which you approach both grace and art?
I think so. When I wrote, when I was living in Phoenix, I taught at Glendale Community College, and the library there had this completely unusual collection of art that you would not expect a community college library to have. It had 2 Picassos, not the major works, right? But it had an Andy Warhol, it had a Goya. And I would actually, this is when I was working on my book, I would block out time and go to the library and sit amongst the art and write. And that was, you know, I even put a little sign up, do not disturb, because I didn't want questions about when was the essay due, you know?
Yes, so you're so lucky in that sense. Like you had like that library, like for you to visit frequently, I suppose.
It was amazing. It literally was the next building over from where my office was. I literally just had to go out and around. And I mean, it was so unexpected. It was gorgeous.
Right. And for those in our audience who would like to continue with the writing journey, maybe through poetry or the other arts, are there some resources that you can recommend to them?
Ah, I can tell you that I would say definitely look for workshops. Poetry on the Move, for example, is we're offering workshops in October, and originally we're offering a mix of both online and face-to-face, but it's looking like everything's going to be moved online, in which case, we can have people participate from all over the world. So I would say, I mean, it certainly doesn't have to be poetry on the move, but I would say, in a time where so many people are at home, maybe doing something online that helps you go a little bit inward is a really great way to cope, even make understanding and meaning out of it. And and I would say too, like I found this, I took a workshop online. It was out of the UK, and they showed us this website where like you hit the button and it will take you to any museum in the world. It will surprise you. And I got a poem out of that.
Great.
So there's lots of ways to do this, without ever stepping foot now.
And a lot of people have actually been very productive during these protracted lockdowns all over the world. And I don't know what it's like in Canberra because we don't get to hear much about that city here. But we know that Melbourne and Sydney have been in lockdowns. And we have many friends there. And like, how has it been for you? Has it been helpful with your craft at all?
We have been absolutely so fortunate here. We had an entire year just in Canberra, and other parts of Australia, with no lockdown because somehow we were able to, we just didn't have active cases. And so we've just been in re-lockdown, new lockdown now, maybe 3-4 weeks. And I know, all of my family are back in the States. I know how hard it's been. My mom had COVID. I've got family members who had it. I think we just had this strange bubble. And I don't, now that we're back home again, I just do more reading. I don't know, I'm in my books now all the time. So, yeah.
All right. Yeah. Thank you very much, Kimberly. Our next poet is a friend of Diaz Martin's. He's also a good friend of ours. Aaron Lee is a pilgrim poet, a writing mentor, and a bivocational pastor and regulatory and ethics lawyer based here in Singapore. He has authored 3 collections of poetry and served as an anthologist and editor for several others, including Love Gathers All, the Philippines Singapore Anthology of Love Poetry. In 2014, Aaron and his wife, the national artist Namiko-chan Takahashi, co-founded the Lanyakea Culture Collective, an interdisciplinary and intercultural art practice that builds communities. And so, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Aaron Lee.
Friends, I'm just so thrilled to be in such company this evening. It's a fantastic way for me to just wind down the workday. I'm just so refreshed by the words that you've shared, your demeanor, and this fellowship. I'm very, very thankful to be included in A Given Grace, this long-awaited anthology. I think it's going to be the first ever anthology of Christian poetry published in Singapore. And I'm just also very thrilled to be on this reading with all of you. Thank you so much for what you shared. I was greatly ministered to and challenged by the poetry that you all shared today. If I may, I'd like to read 4 poems. I write poems that are quite short and mostly in the lyric form this evening, and I'll start with an ekphrastic poem, just responding to the many art-inspired poems that you have all shared this evening. This one is called Descent, and it's a response to seeing a fresco by Masaccio called The Expulsion from Eden. And when I wrote this poem, I was an undergrad, and I had not seen the fresco personally. I had just seen it in a book.
And where is it, Aaron?
Sorry?
Where is that fresco? The fresco.
It's in Florence, I believe. It's on the wall of the Brancacci Chapel in a church called the Santa Maria del Carmine. So the 6 years after I wrote this poem and published it, I got married. I went on a honeymoon to Italy, and I just insisted that we go and pay a visit to this chapel, and my wife was very happy to do that because she's a visual artist and a painter, and so it was very, very special. So the title of the poem is Descent. Stillness. Into the dewdrop silence, morning is ushered, a visitation of sunlight. They stumble through paradise, nakedly unsure, bound invisibly to earth. It is still light, yet darkness follows close on their earth-soiled heels, eternal and damning. At the gate, despairing tongues are loosed, and rising to the canopy, the incense of their departing cries. So that's Descent. Not all my poems, I think maybe perhaps few of my poems actually have recognizably biblical themes in them or imagery. But this one that I'm going to read next does. It's a poem written from the viewpoint of Lazarus. I was kind of intrigued to know, he's so famous, right, for having been raised from the dead by Jesus. And I was kind of intrigued to know that the Gospels don't really record anything that he personally said. Even after he was raised from the dead, there is not a word recorded in the Bible about what he said, although it was quite clear that he did go on to talk and speak and give an account of what had happened, but his words are actually not recorded. So I kind of took it upon myself to write a short poem from his viewpoint. And the poem is titled Miracle, and there's an opening epigraph that goes like this. Legend says that when Lazarus once saw a man stealing a pot, he observed with amusement, clay stealing clay. And apparently that was the only time Lazarus laughed in his life. So here goes. Once a man looked into my 8-year-old eyes and said I would cause the death of one I loved. Years later, I was relieved when my long illness took a turn for the worse. I imagined that my sisters must be distraught. As for me, here I am, reposing in bedrock, dreaming of being in the mountains. My childhood years are a span of unfurled linen, a premonition of itself. I'm no prophet and could never have seen this improbability. Still, I have some inkling of what is to happen. After a lifetime in this closed heat and grinding dust, the blackness will be rent. My friend will call my name, and I, troubled clay, and bereft of conclusions will rise to an undying sky. I've published, as you heard, only 3 slender collections of poetry in my 30-something years of writing and seeing myself as a kind of a serious, committed writer. And this most recent book, titled Coastlands, is inspired by the sense of being home and away in various places that I've lived, including Malaysia, where I was born, in Johor, the southernmost state of Peninsular Malaysia, in Singapore, where I've lived a lot of my years working and bring up family, and also Hawaii, where my wife is a student and a practitioner of the Hawaiian arts, and she has a mentor and teacher there, and we have community and family there. So this poem was actually written on the spot, on the beach, on the north shore of Oahu. And it's, I wrote it the first morning after I arrived in 2014. It's titled Time Lapse. Woke in slow light, wandered the house, and then irresistibly drawn outside to the far end of the alabaster beach where the sand stretched untouched. Lay down, eyes closed like ruined wood, dissolving into a faltering sea, a long meandering of moments before mindfulness returned. In the high distance, a noiseless jet pressed an arc against the still blue of sky. Its font was a lucid line, a vesper, a whisper, a wisp, with nothing in between. All these many miles from one coast to another, across the curve of earth, to finally come to a kind of rest here. Tell me again where home is, where inhabit all the holy hours, where someday you will find me. And lastly, also a poem with a Hawaiian theme. It's a tongue-in-cheek poem, 14 lines, titled Nu'u's Dream of the Mountain. I was intrigued to discover that the ancient Hawaiians had a legend of the Great Flood, just like the biblical one. And Nu'u is the name of the protagonist. And I wrote this a little after, I think, seeing the Russell Crowe movie, and boy, was it not good. Okay, so Nu'u's Dream of the Mountain. I am no oracle. I hardly prayed, heard no word from God, only noticed the quickening in the air. Though it was odd how I dreamt each night I had drowned, eaten by the sea. And when the wet winds got more frequent, I quietly went about my business, sought no help from my sons or Lilinoe, my wife. In fact, there was nobody to account for. But I'm not too old. I hardly sleep. I can work all day. So I piled logs high, and to keep them dry, lit fires and tended them, stared at their twisted hearts for hours when I wasn't chopping trees. Then the skies became gray and always pouring. Now here we are, and it seems like years have passed since the dogs climbed into this tub with us. What just flicked over our faces? A bird or its shadow? Rain is what lured us in, and what happens tomorrow. Thank you for listening.
That's great. Thank you very much, Aaron. I have a few questions about your work. So you write about spectacular landscapes that are charged with God's grandeur. Are your encounters with nature occasions of grace?
Absolutely, absolutely. Although it hasn't always been that way. As I mentioned, I grew up in sort of a rural in the countryside in Malaysia, and I lived for 15 years there. And so the natural landscape was around me. And since I moved to Singapore, that city of cities, it's just so dense and urbanized and fast paced. I've just sort of over time kind of realized that the city can be a rather dehumanizing place to be. The anonymity of people, our stresses, all the activity with, so I've sort of leaned back, if you like, into my growing up years of being surrounded by trees and playing in ponds and by the sea, that can be traced in the books I've written, the books of poetry. So my second collection, 5 Right Angles, was published after I had settled down in Singapore for a little while. It's essentially a collection of urban poetry. What does it mean to be a child of the city? And then my third book was one in which I just sort of went back to marvel at the natural landscape, which are all signs of God's incredible grace and creativity and wonderment. I'm reminded of what the 17th century poet and pastor Edward Young wrote. He said, "Wonder is involuntary praise." So I believe we all have that experience of really just being astounded and enraptured and captivated by a sunset or a flower. And it's a great teacher. Nature is a great teacher. And I appreciate that so much.
Great. And Lazarus, the poem, is also an outstanding work. And it's quite ambitious too. You're making the born again speak in verse. And how is that a lifetime project of yours?
Wow, that's a great question, Eric. Thanks for putting me on the spot. I think, it's really just, as you guys know, a human being is a trinity. We are body and soul and spirit. And it really would not behoove our daily life and our walk if we were to see everything only in spiritual terms. And I believe that the beloved pastor theologian Eugene Peterson said something along those lines as well about the North Pole of theology and the knowledge of God and what he's doing in the world that he made, and then the South Pole of the arts, which really means that we engage fully, in life's journey on earth. I think all of us as poets and human beings are vitally involved in this enterprise of being in the world and not of the world. I sometimes call myself a pilgrim poet. I know that I'm on a journey, and I just want to, in my writing, to sort of celebrate what God is doing in my life and in the world that he made, as well as to help people to pay attention. So writing for me is a way of paying attention, paying close attention to life. Yeah,
that's great. And you're also a fintech lawyer. And there are not too many poets out there who are like that. Has your faith informed your professional work? You've already talked about how it has done that with your writing, but what about for the rest of your professional life?
Yeah, we asked Gerald Yam that question too, and both of you are confessional poets along with Amanda Chong, and it's so interesting how you align it all. And you're an ethics lawyer, so how does it mesh nicely?
Yeah, so really, I think that's the thing. I've just found myself over the years, professionally, over 20-something years, moving into that space of being concerned with ethics and how we do things, and not just being concerned about doing things right, but also doing the right things. So that's been a space where I've sort of found myself in advising companies, especially when they develop technology, and we are really in a very special industrial revolution right now, where technology is really is being developed in a really interesting way with AI, data analytics, so I've just found that there's a lot of things to discover about how we use technology so that technology doesn't master us. Yeah.
So there's this room for grace there too.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Right.
All right. Thank you so much, Aaron. You're such a darling. You're one representative Singapore poet for this Canberra launch. We've got two more poets who are going to read for us, and they can't be with us in person, but they pre-recorded so generously their readings. Eric, could you do the honors of introducing our next poet, Julie Maul?
With pleasure. So Best of the Net and a 6-time Pushcart Prize nominee, Julie Moore is the author of 4 poetry collections, including most recently, Full Worm Moon. It won a 2018 Woodrow Hall Top Shelf Award and received honorable mention for the Conference on Christianity and Literature's 2018 Book of the Year Award. Her poetry has appeared in the African American Review, Alaska Quarterly Review, the Christian Century, Image, New Ohio Review, Poetry Daily, Prairie Schooner, the Southern Review, and Verse Daily. Moore is the Writing Center Director at Taylor University, where she likewise serves as the Poetry Editor for Relief Journal. Learn more about her work at julielmoore.com.
Okay, here is Julie for everybody.
Hello, I am Julie Moore, and I am just pleased to be participating with you in this year's Poetry on the Move conference sponsored by the University of Canberra. I am honored, in fact, to be joining you and to be reading some of my poems with you today as part of A Given Grace, the anthology of poems that has been published. This anthology includes 5 of my poems from 2 of my books, Particular Scandals and Full Worm Moon. So I thought that you might enjoy seeing those books. They were published in 2013 and 2018, respectively, by Cascade Books in their Poema Poetry series, which is an imprint of Wits and Stock Publisher. So I've been honored to be a part of that series as well. I'm going to read with you today 3 of the poems that appear in A Given Grace, and 2 come from Particular Scandals and 1 from Full Worm Moon. Particular Scandals is a book that came out again in 2013. And when it came out, it was after I had gone through quite a few surgeries and quite a lot of pain, quite a lot of physical suffering. And so the first poem I'm going to read to you is called Recovery, again, written on the heels of my final surgery, which finally brought me some good health yet to come, but I didn't know that at that time. And a theme in this book is really about the endurance of such suffering, not necessarily the transcendence, not glossing over it either, and not necessarily wallowing in it, but enduring it, really just embracing it for what it was, but also having to live through a lot of pain and try to find value in that. So the first poem is called Recovery. Walking along my front porch, I rub my swollen belly like I did years ago when I was expecting a miracle. I am empty, gutted like the old farmhouse across the street, every room pared down to the frame's bare bones. Even the floors have been removed. All I want is a day when the pain breaks. I've had 7 surgeries now, adhesions excised like splinters, 4 rundown organs pulled out like windows and walls. Here in midlife, I'm nothing but pure ruin. And part of me would like to give up, dissolve into dust like my neighbor's brick. But in the ash trees that line our road, in flawless iambs, the sparrows chant, preserve, 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 preserve. and I step into our yard where bees, persistent as repeated pleas, poise themselves before the roses, then bury their cells in their velvet breasts, suckling sugar, tasting grace as insistent as the tune they hum. The next poem I'm going to read is called Clifton Gorge. I used to live in Ohio, a state that is right next door to Indiana, where I now live. And I used to hike a lot at Clifton Gorge. It's a beautiful gorge and lots of great hiking paths. And I would take my dog. And I also wrote a poem about this gorge and wrote this poem after one of those hikes. This poem is called Clifton Gorge and has an epigraph from Gerard Manley Hopkins' famous poem, God's Grandeur, which reads, "There lives the dearest freshness deep down things. Blossom floods the woods, swathing our senses like moss swaddles roots and earth. Ferns flutter in the shadow of the wind moving through, while we descend into the sanctuary of the gorge, like the sun lowers its long beams through the green lattice of leaves above. We hope to hit bottom as the thrush throws its deep voice across the ravine, where a woodpecker knocks on a door of oak and a lip of limestone loosens, tumbles down, greets us at the stream, which even now rips through rock, then pulls its energy along the banks, where minnows animate the ruin, stirring the cup brimming with revival, their small bodies, flashes of hallelujah. As I continued to write and to live, I also sadly went through the end of my long marriage, my 27-year marriage, which ended with quite a bit of suffering in terms of emotional suffering and some quite unfortunate and traumatic abuse, emotionally, physically. And so the poem I'm going to read to you from Full Warm Moon, which was published in 2018, is called Full Thunder Moon. It relates to the first two poems because, once again, I am outside as I am the voice of this poem. But it differs because as I wrote these poems, I realized I needed to gain some distance from the pain. And so I ended up writing these poems in third person. And so you'll hear the third person pronoun she throughout this poem. And so the entire first section of this book is poems that detail this experience and, again, the endurance of this experience. This poem, again, is called Full Thunder Moon. And I wrote it after visiting St. Meinrad Archabbey at Benedictine Monastery in southern Indiana. And had this experience there as I was seeking solitude and solace. It has an epigraph from Psalm 57:1, which reads, "Be merciful to me, O God, for I have taken refuge in you. In the shadow of your wings, I will take refuge until this time of trouble has gone by." Full Thunder Moon. Sitting in the gazebo at St. Meinrad Archabbey, she hears the sky grumbling as one cloud swells, its lining stretched so thin, all she can see is the darkness within. Dusk slinks in beneath it. The first few fireflies flicker. Lights go on in each eventual window as the monks ready for their simple beds. At Compline, their prayers prepared them for the keening that comes with loss, whether of light or life. Swatting the occasional mosquito here beneath the full thunder moon, she inhales air thick with solace, the only breath possible with rain pending. As the first drops finally fall, she realizes how indifferent they are to whether her marriage lasted 2 years or 27. It's all the same to them as they hurry down their flights of stairs, every one of them determined to skip the last 2 steps, land hard, it doesn't matter where. They are not picky. They have no scruples. So of course they alight on the bare arms of a wife who's endured 7 surgeries, whose husband left her, then told her, your health problems have worn me out. The storm doesn't give a rip. It doesn't even know it could be used for good, showering fields overflowing with barley and wheat and corn, as everyone knows, or driving a woman to seek refuge in a place so vulnerable and open, a bird, say a sparrow or a finch, might glide in and roost right there within an inch of her care. Thank you again for inviting me to participate in this reading. I hope that you'll enjoy the rest of the poets as they read their poems from A Giving Grace and the rest of this conference.
All right, so our final reader for tonight is Marjorie Maddox. She's a professor of English at Lock Haven University. Marjorie Maddox has published 11 collections of poetry, including Transplant, Transport, Transubstantiation, historic collection What She Was Saying, 4 children's and young adult books, including Inside Out, poems on writing and reading poems with insider exercises, and I'm Feeling Blue Too, and Presence, a journal of Catholic poetry, for which she is the assistant editor. Her books begin with a question published by Paraclete 2022, and Heart Speaks is spoken for, published by Shanty Arts 2021, are forthcoming. Her website is www.marjoriemaddox.com.
Hello, this is Marjorie Maddox coming to you from Williamsport, Pennsylvania, USA. And I'm very grateful to be part of this reading and to be part of A Given Grace anthology. I wanted to share my screen for this first poem so that you could see the painting that the poem is based on. So this poem is called Overboard, and it's after the painting Jonah by James Patrick Reed. And it's a villanelle, so you'll notice the repetition of the lines. Overboard. Ready to swallow the fallen, the sea swells. The waters want me, Jonah cries, running, running, always running away. Called to Nineveh, he fled the other way. Holed up on a ship with his tempest of lies, the fallen one is ready to be swallowed. The sea swells. O great whale, arise, each tooth a sword aimed at the deserter. City and ship compromised, the man's running, running, always running away. Called by the God we're fleeing, like Jonah, we're swallowed whole. A mercy, this digestion of grace, internalized, we're ready to swallow our fallenness. See how guilt swells to epiphany and penance, here in the beast's belly. In the foul cavern of ribs, spirit swims in to evangelize, the one running, running, always running away. He calls and claims his own for 3 dark days until captor expels its captive. Resurrection prophesied for the capsized, the ready. Here, the fallen swallowed, mercy swells always. The Savior still running, running, running toward, calling. And this particular poem was a finalist in the 2021 Catholic Literary Arts Sacred Arts Contest and published in Reformed Journal. So I'm going to read 2 more poems for you. And let me just pull those up then. And this is a brief poem that I think is really a comfort to all of us during these troubled times. Full of grace. And that one true good, your Magnificat, soothes our mornings, cradles a world sad with its own undoing. Mother Mary, hold our earth-stained hands, let us crawl on the lap that held him. And this last poem was written for Diaz Martin's blog, Poems for Ephesians, where he asked poets to respond to various passages in the book of Ephesians. So this poem also will be included in my forthcoming book, Begin with a Question, which will be out in February from Paraclete Press. Voices Raised, Ephesians 2:19. No longer strangers and foreigners, we're fellow citizens with the saints, native and naturalized, jointly inhabitants of the ethereal, mercy and perpetuity, a claim so strange, it rewrites all requirements of residency, every psyche's bylaws. No longer partitioned off by sin, by regret, by self-righteousness, on reservations, on street corners, behind walls, behind barbed wire, behind preconceived hallelujahs and amens, flat blessings and fat curses of who, what, where, when, why we are. Behind and for all, yes, we sing a cappella and instrumental, harmony and melody. We sing citizenship and pledge throughout the holy household with our off-key, shrill and wobbly human notes. By God, we sing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marjorie. And that concludes our reading for tonight. All right, thank you very much, all of you.
Thank you so much, everybody, for sharing this space with us. It's a true honor to have heard your wonderful poems and voices and your insights.
And Desmond, these are not the only luminaries that we have, right? In this anthology, we also have people like Edwin Thambu, Yong Shu Hong from Singapore, and from the Philippines, Marjorie Evasco, Danton Remoto, and some big stars
we've
of the
got
poetry scene.
Yes. We've got Gerard Smith, we've got Joseph Stanton from Hawaii, Karen Ann Hui Lee, Barbara Crocker, lots, just amazing. And we're going to be inviting different people for other readings down the road. And thanks to Zoom. So thank you everyone for your patience.
Thank you very much.
We are so blessed to share this space with all of you.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you.
Thank you,
Des and Eric.
Yes.
Thank you.
everyone.
Okay.
Thanks, Desmond. Thanks, Eric.
Thank you.
Good
Thanks,
morning.
everyone.
Good evening. Bye-bye.
All right.